First of all, Mr. President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, looks good on
I
you.
said the one that attacked you last time. See, now he's in. I remember that.
Yeah, I apologize to you. You look wonderful, President Zelensky.
In the same suit. You see, I changed
Quiet Riot. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special Quiet Riot Midnight Mass. Brought to you by Alex and Kenny tonight, stroke this morning, in the aftermath of the Trump-Zelensky and the European meetings at the White House. History potentially in the making, and certainly plenty to discuss. Alex.
Yes.
What were your initial impressions of tonight's result?
I thought the build-up was interesting. I found it very interesting how they all gathered in the Ukrainian embassy. It's like having the WhatsApp group that excludes the one person that's being an asshole. so you can sort of talk about them. It really has that vibe, doesn't it? Anyway, I found the media coverage really set my teeth on edge, to be honest.
There were more of them there than I can remember with any Trump event. I think this is the biggest media event so far.
Yeah, I mean, it was big, but I had to cover it for work, so I was flitting between channels to try and find the experts that suited me, and all of them there was an atmosphere like they were covering a royal wedding. They were quite giddy. I don't think people really got the gravity of the moment and the stakes. They seemed ready to shout, "Volodymyr, who are you wearing?" It really was superficial, and they were obviously having a jolly time. And it made me quite depressed because I thought, well, this is why they love Trump. And this is why they're actively agitating for a sort of Farage prime minister.
What did you make, respectively, of Trump's performance tonight and Zelensky's performance?
I mean, Zelensky had obviously learned from the previous experience and probably been coached quite carefully about what to say and what not to say. I thought there was a warmth between them that wasn't there before. I still sense that Zelensky loathes him with every fibre of his being. And he's sitting there kind of just swallowing
wouldn't you?
hard. But thankfully, Trump is not someone who picks up on that kind of nuance. And so I think the staging had the hallmarks of all of Europe having worked on it. He presented him with a letter from his wife for Melania Trump. The whole thing had exactly all the elements that massage Trump's vanity. I thought it was quite interesting that J.D. Vance was sort of ostracized.
Did you see his face as Zelensky was speaking? In the background.
I actually posted a close-up of his face. While all of them were speaking, he really looked like a pug licking a nettle. He was not a happy bunny. And the latest I hear is that several of the European leaders are actually staying there for more meetings, sort of on the sidelines.
Well,
and
there's a contrast with what Putin did.
And might even have dinner at the White House. I think they just don't want to leave Trump to his own devices before the new position has had time to bed in, because there's always a danger that he says one thing and then goes on Truth Social a couple of hours later and says the exact opposite. I thought it was quite extraordinary that he interrupted the meeting with European leaders to call Putin.
Yeah.
There was a hot mic moment. I don't know if you caught that.
There was. Trump dropped the idea that Putin wants to make a deal to help Trump.
That was the one. He was telling Macron that, do you know, as weird as it sounds, I think he wants to do a deal for me. And I thought that was quite an interesting way of putting it.
I mean, the lack of self-awareness is no surprise, but the naivety, even by Trump standards, is. One thing that really struck me, Trump he looked like he'd melted. He was beyond tired. Really looked like he'd certainly found his breaking point and then gone past it. Surprising, perhaps not, but out of his depth, yeah, very much so.
I mean, he was up at like 5 o'clock yesterday to go play golf in between this and the Alaska trip. And, everyone was going, oh my goodness, I'm no fan of Trump, but boy, does he have stamina for an 80-year-old.
He's that age. He was up at 5 a.m. to go for his third wave the night. We know what that was all about.
So you thought I might as well play
I might as well
around,
have 9 strokes as well. Ooh. So in terms of policy, in terms of announcements, as much as there were announcements, again, what were your initial takeaways?
This is where I part company with some of the commentators, I think, who thought that mission accomplished for Putin. I can see what they're saying, because actually we are talking in terms of fixing the borders and what land Ukraine has to give up and all of that. Putin has shifted the conversation, and he will be pleased with that. But I also thought I detected a real insecurity in Trump, because the fact that he kept going on about how unfair the media is being on him and how he could do the greatest deal and they would still say he'd been humiliated, it does indicate to me that he read the coverage of the Alaska meeting and it did sting him. And there was a very interesting poll out that was, assessing favorability, as they usually do, and Trump's was a few points down, 4 points down since the Alaska meeting. And what was interesting was that Emerson poll also looked at the favorability ratings for Putin and for Zelensky. And Putin is something like minus 77. He's like unfavorable, I think, 85, favorable 8. It's something like that. And the rest don't knows. And Zelensky, of that entire slate of politicians, including various Republican politicians, Zelensky was the only one that was in positives, and he was robustly in positives.
Yeah,
he was sort of
very much.
plus 20 odd. And so I think it's easy to throw out theories about compromat and about Trump being compromised in other ways, and much of that might be true. I think Putin's just very good at manipulating him, and he's very easy to manipulate. I think that's a more likely solution. But I think it's also a problem to start to see Trump as somehow untouchable. He's not untouchable. He cares about popularity. He cares about whether the public see him as being on the side of the popular kids or not. And I think the fact that the meeting in Alaska went down so badly, I think it did sting him. And I think that was the primary reason he began to pivot away from that. Now, it's true that he hasn't moved back to the position that he held before, that a ceasefire is absolutely necessary, although you could see in that meeting that European leaders, especially Merz and Macron, had already started working that back into the conversation, the idea that a ceasefire is necessary. But he has shifted on the notion of America being somehow involved in the security guarantees given to Ukraine. And that was the major deal breaker from the moment he entered office. So I think that is a huge concession. And I think the people who say, oh, it hasn't really moved in any significant way, I don't think that's right. I think the fact that he stated not just once, but 3 or 4 times when he was asked that this wasn't the end of the road for America giving help to Ukraine, and that America was not averse to being somehow involved in the security guarantees in a military way, but that it hadn't been fully discussed yet. I think that is a major, major, major moment.
Something that leapt out at me, given how softly people have to be with Trump and his ilk. There were a couple of occasions when Meloni said quite explicitly, we are on the side of Ukraine. Von der Leyen talked about the tens of thousands of children who are being trafficked, and Trump immediately pivoted to rabbit on about the European trade deal. He barely acknowledged the question. But there's beginnings there of issues where some of the leaders quite clearly are very, very comfortable at taking him on.
What it felt like was that this was the sort of moment towards which all those leaders had been building those relationships for. Alexander Stubb playing golf with him, and Keir Starmer giving him the letter from the king, and von der Leyen doing a relatively quick, easy deal on behalf of the EU, and Meloni is the one that actually proposed this idea of an Article 5-ish sort of guarantee. It felt like they had been kissing his ass, basically, so that they could precisely, not quite call in the chips, but take advantage of the personal relationship they had built with him at a moment precisely like this. It was like the world's most elite babysitting team had assembled. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Though? Because he'd gone off the rails. It's like Thanos had a stroke, and so the rest of the Avengers have to gather around him and make nice and make sure he doesn't click his fingers. And I thought in that sense it was a hugely successful meeting. It really was the moment when all the softly approach came to fruition, and the bromance that Macron has built with him, all of that stuff, it paid off in that moment where he felt that he was in the room with peers and they were giving him the respect that he so badly craves. And that can be a really powerful dopamine hit, especially when he has spent the entire weekend reading piece after piece and seeing news show after news show saying that he went to Alaska and basically melted into an orange puddle.
Yeah.
And so I think well done, all of them. Well done, all of them, for not listening to all those who would love the quick gratification of, a Love Actually moment where you really tell him what you think.
Yeah.
Instead, opted to swallow their obvious dislike for him and kiss his butt and make nice and build painstakingly those relationships, so that at this precise moment when he began to gravitate towards Putin again, which is his natural position because he loves a strong man, they could pull him back from the abyss. And I felt they did that today. They might need to do it again tomorrow. They might need to do it every week for the next 3 fucking years or until he dies.
Well, every time he speaks to Putin, they might need to pull him back.
Yeah, but it's worth doing.
Well,
That's
very
the
much
point.
If you've shopped online, chances are you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes buying so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it incredibly easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/promo. Go to shopify.com/promo.
And we need optimism, and we do need, God knows, we need something positive out of this. But it's also, I think, important to remember what a low place today's meeting came from. Zelensky's first trip to the White House, the disaster in Alaska. And the reality is that Putin himself is still blowing 7 shades out of Ukraine. He's still wanting Donbass as part of a deal. Nothing's changed in terms of what's happening in the war itself at this stage.
Yeah.
But it looks like a welcome move in the right direction for diplomatic reasons.
Yeah. And, don't forget that every time this happens is a little bit more time for Europe to prepare, to spend some money, to build its stocks of arms, to build its manufacturing capacity, to be ready to stand more on its own 2 feet. Because the moment will come, I think, when Trump might finally abandon Ukraine to Russia. I think that's still very possible. Yeah, but the point is that, I saw one analysis from Alberto Nardelli on Bloomberg, for whom I have a huge amount of time, but I just disagree with his analysis, which was Europe can do whatever it wants, but it's trying to hide from a really basic question, which is, do you trust Trump? And I don't think that question, I don't think anyone is hiding from that question. I don't think anyone is asking that question, because Europe no longer trusts Trump at all. The name of the game now is gaining time. Gaining enough time so that they no longer have to rely on Trump. They have finally got the memo that Europe needs to stand on its own 2 feet in terms of defense, in terms of energy supplies, all of that. The changes that have happened across Europe over the last 3 years are actually monumental. For a country like Germany to move from a position where not only it wasn't investing in defense, it was actively discouraged from investing in defense, to a position where it's spending 5% and building up its sort of arsenal, is a huge sea change across Europe. To move to a position where Finland and Sweden are now part of NATO, and now you have the beginnings of America articulating that maybe it needs to be part of a security guarantee offered to Ukraine. That is actually Putin's nightmare scenario, to have a well-armed, cautious, suspicious Europe on his doorstep, actually patrolling its border.
Absolutely. And in the short term, the word for me of the last 2 or 3 days has been ceasefire. After his Putin meeting, Trump moved from the idea of ceasefire to, no, we want peace, which was widely seen as a play straight into Putin. But the European leaders were quite forceful, have been quite forceful in recent hours about the need for a ceasefire, the importance of not falling into that trap that it appears Putin was trying to set. So there are quite high stakes here, even in the next week, 10 days, when we see whether anybody actually has any genuine influence here.
And it was interesting that, again, Trump sought to explain that 2 or 3 times and gave quite a lot away in saying that, well, yeah, I can see it from their point of view that they might not want a ceasefire because they're doing quite well in the war at the moment.
Yep.
And it's like, yeah, but recasting yourself as somehow a neutral broker in this is not entirely right. You are part of NATO. You're Europe's ally. Putin is your historic enemy. So saying, well, I can see it from his point of view is neither here nor there, really. The fact he doesn't want a ceasefire because it gives away some military advantage is precisely why you should be pushing him for a ceasefire and putting those economic sanctions back on him. I think it will take a lot of convincing to move him back into that position. But I don't think it's impossible, because what's very, very clear is that Trump wants this off his desk. And the fundamental objective that Putin had in the Alaska meeting was to shift the focus back on Zelensky, to say, I am ready to do this thing, but he needs to be more reasonable.
Yeah.
And actually what's happened now is that everyone's shown up and everyone's been immensely reasonable, and that shifts the focus back on Putin. So if in 2 weeks' time there's no progress, you could very easily see Trump begin to get frustrated with Putin again and threatening secondary economic sanctions, because he wants this thing done. He wants this thing over with. It's what he campaigned on. It is embarrassing for him. It is embarrassing to watch him invent wars he ended, just because he hasn't ended the one he promised to end. So he sits there and says, oh, I've ended 4, 5, 6, 7 wars that you don't even know about. It's embarrassing, and you can sense his embarrassment. So he needs this done. And now that the focus is back on Putin, now that the Europeans and Ukraine have been very reasonable and have said, okay, let's talk about all of that, it shifts back to Putin, and Putin won't agree to any of this. So his bluff has essentially been called.
Yeah.
And that leaves him, I think, a little bit vulnerable to becoming the bad guy in Trump's eyes again in the next couple of weeks. But we'll see.
There was talk of a 3-way meeting. Earlier in the day, it was emerging that Putin had discussed the idea of I think they called it raising the level of representatives of Moscow and Kyiv. In other words, sending in bigger guns, to use an unfortunate metaphor. And I suppose what we're all looking for is any indication that either Putin himself or one of his most trusted generals is pulled in to negotiations. Because until that happens, of course, it's not being taken seriously, is it?
Yeah, but because he's making slow gains, he wants to delay as much as possible. So none of the energy to make this happen is going to come from Russia at all. The longer this goes on, the better for them. And so, this all has to move from the US and Europe. And like I said, being now in a position where Europe has been very accommodating and very open to discussing it all, puts the ball back in Putin's court. And if he doesn't volley back in the next few days, couple of weeks, then it begins to look again like it's him that's obstructing this thing that Trump wants.
And I suppose finally, this is a much more of a left field question. Trump said that he was in a stage of beginning to think about arrangements for a meeting between Putin and Zelensky with Trump himself. He called it, what do they call it? The trilat. We're going to have a trilat.
Yeah, a trilat. Yeah. Which a couple of European leaders immediately said it needs to be a quadrilat, because there is another side to this, and that is Europe. These are our borders, this is our security, and we should be involved. And that was, I think, Macron that went in with that. Merz, much smarter actually, offered to host it, knowing that if you're the venue, then by definition it becomes a quadrilateral conversation, because you're the host.
That's the Nobel Peace Prize play, isn't it, from Trump's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. He really wants that fucking Peace Prize, doesn't he? There was a terrific segment of Hillary Clinton on a podcast yesterday where she said, I will sign and send in the nomination myself if he does manage to somehow engineer a just peace in Ukraine. She's like, I don't mind at all. I don't care if the credit is his or everyone else's. It doesn't matter. If that's what he wants, let's give it to him so he can get there.
Baubles for peace. Put that on a T-shirt.
Yeah.
Alex, that was fantastic. I hope you can get back to bed and get a few hours sleep now.
Yeah, I'll do a quick edit and stick this out as quickly as I can, and then I'll sleep the sleep of the just.
Well, thanks for joining us today, and don't forget to tune in on Thursday for our regular midweek Quiet Riot with all the usual features.
And if you appreciate the long shifts we pull, you know what to do. ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. Go in there and give us a $5.
We don't demand Nobel Prizes of any sort, but enough for a cup of coffee. That
They'd
would do
be
for
nice.
us.
They would be nice. I'm not going to lie. I would take physics at a push.
Oh, you're so cheap. You're such a tart.
All right, we love you lots. Bye.
Bye for now.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot.
Past, Present, Future is the History of Ideas podcast with me, David Runtsman. Twice a week, we explore the history of good ideas, dangerous ideas, revolutionary ideas, and recently, the history of bad ideas. From meritocracy to genius, from austerity to identity, why do good people believe in things that do so much harm? Past, Present, Future, the History of Ideas podcast.